welcome to Garden Air. I am Natalie, and today I wanted to talk about what you need to know and what you need to have to get ready to make your sourdough bread. So sourdough is not like every other bread that you make. It's quite different, and there are some things that you should know and have prepared beforehand. The main one being your sourdough starter. So sourdough, if you're used to making normal bread, you go off to the store and you buy your dry active yeast and you make your bread. Sourdough is not like that. You are actually making your own yeast and culturing your own little colony of bacteria and yeast that's found in the air, and you're feeding it every day. And you have to maintain that active yeast on your own in your pantry on a daily or weekly basis. And then once your colony is active, you are using that to ferment to leaven your bread. So it is quite the process and it's quite the commitment, but it is also extremely rewarding and one of the best breads that you can bake at home. So what I want to discuss today is what you need to have ready to make sourdough bread for the first time. I'm going to show you how to make your starter, how to feed it and take care of it every day, and how to know when it's ready to actually use. And then I'm also going to show you some of the tools and equipment that's commonly bought for sourdough bread. You really don't need the tools. You can make it without it. When I do the sourdough bread making video and show you how to do the actual bread, which is a 2-day process, I'm going to show you how to use the tools, but I'm also going to show you what you can do if you don't have the tools. But in this video, I'm going to show you what the tools are, explain to you how they're used, so you can decide if you actually want to buy them or not. They are helpful in making sourdough bread, but they are not a necessity. So making a starter from scratch is very simple. All you need is flour and water. That's it, and time. So you can really use any kind of flour that you like, whatever you want in your sourdough bread, in your sourdough. It's going to create yeast just the same, but there are some flours that are a little bit quicker and a little bit, I don't know, they more easily grow the bacteria and the yeast, so they say. I don't know if I notice a difference. So those two flours are rye and whole wheat. They tend to grow the cultures a little bit more quickly. However, if all you have is plain all-purpose flour, you can certainly use that. You don't have to blend them. You can use whatever you want. What I do is a mixture of whole wheat flour and unbleached bread flour. Sometimes I use all-purpose if that's all that I have on hand. It's fine. And then that kitchen scale is a necessity. Buy your kitchen scale. It is the one tool I'm going to tell you you absolutely have to have. And okay, you need a clean mason jar, about a pint size, or anything that will have a nice lid for it, because you're going to be keeping your yeast in there pretty much indefinitely. So have a nice jar with a nice fitting lid. Okay, so what I'm going to do to begin is just measure out my jar. Well, I'm just going to put my jar on and tear it out to 0 grams and go ahead and start adding my flour. I need a clean spoon. And I'm going to want 100 grams total of flour. So I'm going to do 50 grams of my bread flour and then 50 grams of my whole wheat flour. And again, rye flour is really nice to use as well as wheat. I like the rye flour. I just don't have any right now, so I've been using wheat. And then to your jar of flour, add in 100 grams of water. And then just stir it up. Make sure it's nice and even. Everything has to be moist. Make sure there's no dried flour sticking to the bottom or the sides of your jar. That's why having a clear jar You really want a clear jar to keep this in, because as you feed it every day, you will want to be able to see the flour inside. You will want to see the action inside. You'll need to monitor and watch it, so a clear jar is highly recommended. Okay, so that's it. Make sure it's moist. So this is what we have. Nothing special right now, but it will be. Okay, so there we go. That's all you do. And then you're going to set this to the side on the counter at room temperature. Put your lid on loosely, so just a light fit, and set this aside for one day. And then tomorrow you're going to feed it. I'm going to show you that coming up next, how to feed your starter. And you're going to do this every single day. And within anywhere between 7 to 10 days, depending on your environment, you will start to have a fermentation going on. And eventually this will go sour, and you'll see this rise up the side and then deflate throughout the day. Once you see a steady rise and fall of your starter, your yeast is ready. That's when it's active. It'll be bubbly, it'll be thick, it'll be regularly rising and falling. If you feed it the same time every day, you'll be able to know when to expect it to go up and when to expect it to deflate again. It's a matter of usually about 5 hours to start really get active and rise, and then at the end of the day you'll notice it's flat and getting ready for tomorrow's feeding. My dog's playing in the background. I hope he's not too noisy. He has a bone. So once you see it's active, it's bubbly, you pick it up and you smell it, and it doesn't just smell like flour and water anymore. It actually has a tangy, sweet, yeasty smell. That's what you're looking for, and that's when your starter will be ready to feed for an actual bread making day. And then that's really exciting, and the most rewarding part of this entire process is to finally make that beautiful loaf of sourdough bread. Once you have your starter made and active, you have to take care of it every day. It has to be continually fed and, well, taken care of like a little pet on a regular basis, so that your cultures don't just sit in the jar and die. You can do this in a couple of different ways. One, you can leave it at room temperature on your counter or in your pantry and feed it every single day. Or you can keep this in the refrigerator and feed it once or twice a week, depending on how active your cultures seem to be for you. I did keep mine in the refrigerator for a while, and I was able to feed it once a week, and it was doing pretty good. I didn't prefer the refrigerator, only because for me it was out of sight, out of mind, a little too much. And I wasn't as good at remembering it as I was when it was right out on my counter. I could see it every day, and every day I could just be like, oh, I need to feed my starter. It's just a thing that I do now when I make the morning coffee. So if you can attach it to a routine that you already do, that's the best way to remember and start making it more of a habit and a routine for yourself. Attach it to something you already do. So if once a week is good for you, let's say on Wednesday, you do something specific in the morning, like maybe water your plants or whatever, attach it to that routine so that it becomes a part of that routine, and then you're more able to remember to do it. Talking is an issue. So I'm going to show you how I feed my starter. This is ready for feeding. See, it's down at the bottom of the jar. It was active yesterday. It went up the jar, and now it's down and it's deflated and it's out of food. And if I don't feed it, I'm going to lose all my cultures. So this is the part that needs a little explaining, because you have to remove half of these cultures and feed the other half. So a lot of times what you do with the part that you remove is just discard it. But there are things that you can do as well. Like on days that you're making your bread, the part that you remove, you feed that part put it to the side, and that's what you're going to use to make your bread. And then you feed what's left over as well to keep your cultures going while you make bread out of what you took. On days you're not making bread, you can feed the portion that you remove and make something else that day that you need to leaven. It could be another type of bread, it could be waffles, it could be muffins, it could be all sorts of things. You can actually even make little fry dough out of what you remove. Just take it and fry it in oil, and it tastes like a sweet sour fried dough. Put cinnamon sugar on it. It's pretty good. There are different things, or you can just discard it every day. Whatever works for you. The one tool you really do have to have when you make sourdough bread is a kitchen scale. So definitely put that on your list of things that you have to have, because pretty much everything that we do when we make sourdough is measured in grams. So I take a small dish and I tear it out on my scale, and I'm going to take out 85 grams of my starter. Okay, so 85 grams is what I'm putting aside. This is the portion that I'm going to keep and feed. The rest of this that's in this jar, since I'm not making anything today, I'm just going to discard. So to show you now more of what I'm doing, my jar is empty. Scrape it out the best that you can, get everything out. The reason that you only feed a portion of your starter and not all of it, put what you saved back into your jar. The reason you have to take some out is because if you just feed it every day, you're going to have an enormous amount of starter that's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you'll have way too much. And also, the bacteria and cultures will start competing with each other for the food that you give them. So a smaller colony is easier to maintain. There's less competition, easier to keep it healthy. And you have just the right amount of cultures that you really need, and you don't have too much. You can have more than, one jar going at a time. That's fine. Okay, so I have 85 grams of my starter added back to my jar, and this is what I want to feed. So I'm going to put my jar on my scale and open up my grams, and I'm going to feed it 50 grams of my whole wheat flour. You can use any flour that you like, as explained when we made our starter. Use whatever it is that you used when you made it. So I'm doing 50 grams of whole wheat, and then 50 grams of my unbleached bread flour. So you're going to have 100 grams total of dry flour. And to this, you're going to add 100 grams of warm water. Stir it up thoroughly. Make sure nothing is dry in the bottom. And now you just fed your cultures. Scrape down your sides, keep them somewhat clean. Your jar will never look clean, but it's really just full of your yeasty cultures. You never really have to wash your jar. I kind of like chip away at the edge to keep my edge clean, because of all of this just dries out along the top. Hot water will keep that clean. And loosely keep it covered and set it aside. And This will rise and fall as the bacteria eat. Hey, so I wanted to jump in the middle here really quick and just say another great thing about sourdough is that once you have your starter and it's active, you can share it. You can share it with friends. It's like how friendship bread began. Once it's active, instead of throwing away your portion for the day, you give that portion to someone else, and then they take it home and they feed it, and then right away they have an active culture. It's also a great way for you to get a good starter that's already ready to go, is if you know somebody who has some. They can give you some and you just take it home and start feeding it, and bam, you don't have to wait that 2 weeks. So let's talk about all of the tools that go into making sourdough bread. There's a lot here and you might not know exactly what they are or how to use them. So I'm going to take the time to explain to you what all of this is for, why some of them you do really need, and then some of them are more optional, and really a matter of whether you truly want them or not. So let's go into each one. I'll explain how to use them, and you decide for yourself if you want to add them to your kitchen. All right, so I have my tools out in front of me, and let's start with the most basic and essential tool. This is the one thing you absolutely do want to get, and that's a kitchen scale. You're going to measure your starter, like I've already shown. When you make your starter, you're going to need to measure everything out in grams. And then when you actually make your bread, you're also going to be making your recipe for your bread in grams. You can get some really inexpensive kitchen scales if you don't already have one. You can order them on Amazon. You can go to Harbor Freight. I get this one from Harbor Freight. It's only like $29.99. There are some more simple ones. Just make sure your scale is able to measure in grams. It is a requirement, and probably the only one that I'm actually going to say you absolutely have. The other one, being very close to having to have, is a Dutch oven. A Dutch oven is pretty much required, although you can get around baking your bread without one. So the crust that we get on our sourdough is thanks to the Dutch oven. Because this is a moist bread, you're using a lot of water in your dough. We need to use that Dutch oven lid to help keep moisture retained in our bread while it's baking. For the first 20 minutes, we bake very, very high heat, like 500 degrees, with the lid on, keeping the moisture baking around the bread. And it's going to help form that crust around your sourdough bread, keeping the inside moist. And then for the last 30 minutes, you take the top off and you bake at 450 to finish baking off the bread. And you get that soft, bubbly inside with that chewy, wonderful hard crust on the outside, all thanks to the Dutch oven. So if you don't have a Dutch oven, you do want another form of pan that's going to help keep shape of the bread. That's the other thing that a round Dutch oven does. It helps keep the shape of the bread. You can use a longer kind of pan. If you don't have a Dutch oven and you're going to be baking your bread open on a different kind of baking pan, what you need to do is just place a bowl of water inside the oven with your bread, and that should help keep some moisture around your bread as it bakes, and that will help simulate what the Dutch oven would do. So a scale and a Dutch oven are your two most required items. You can get around the Dutch oven, but the scale you cannot. So this is the next tool. This is a dough blender, and it's just a stirring tool because sourdough dough is extremely wet. You're usually doing at a 75 to 80% hydration on the dough, so it's extremely sticky and gooey. It sticks to everything. So this stirring tool helps keep the dough out of your fingers, out of your nails, That's kind of gross, and keeps everything clean while you're just dealing with that wet, sticky dough, especially in the beginning of the bread making process. So while it's not required, it is definitely a helpful tool. The next item that is really good to have but not required are the banneton baskets. This is again because your dough is so wet that it doesn't keep its shape as it rises. If you put it on a flat surface or like a wide bowl, your dough is going to end up just kind of like dropping as you're leavening it. It doesn't rise quite upward like most breads that you might be used to baking. Your dough is just so wet and heavy that it's just going to kind of do this and leaven kind of on a more broad shape. So a banneton basket helps keep the shape of your bread while it's leavening and keeping it round, and that's how you get that beautiful round shape between your baskets and your Dutch oven. Sometimes they come with like this linen cover, which is really nice to have. You just flour it really heavily, put your dough inside to keep it from sticking while it's leavening, and then from there you pop it into your Dutch oven. If you don't have the linen covers, it's not a big deal. You can leaven right inside of the basket itself. Just flour that and do the same thing, and you'll actually get like this really cool swirly pattern coming out on your bread, which is actually very pretty as well. The next tool is your scoring blade. Definitely not a requirement, but you do have to score your sourdough bread, again, because it's so moist, it's so wet that you need to let some of that moisture out, some of the air out. So bread does have to be scored. A knife is really just too wide to get a nice score out of it. So the scoring knife is recommended. Obviously not necessary. You can use a razor blade, you can use a very small sharp paring knife. Just get a very fine cut when you score your dough. A bread cutting blade is really nice to have. I use this more for making rolls and buns more than I find it useful for sourdough. But at the end, when you're kind of like, cutting up your dough, it can be quite helpful. It is nice to have, definitely not needed. The last tool, and this one I find as one of the most handiest, and I really wouldn't go without it while making sourdough bread, is the plastic bread scraper. Absolutely my favorite tool to have for making this bread, because again, it is so wet and sloppy and heavy. So when I am, you don't really need sourdough bread quite like you do normal bread. You kind of like get into the bowl and you get in underneath your dough and you flop it over, and it's more like a folding because you're trying to build the air inside of the bread instead of squishing all the air out. So you're kind of like getting in under and you're flopping it, and you're doing that repetitively throughout the kneading process of this dough. If you do it on a counter, your dough is just so wet and sticky, it sticks all over the counter, and you don't add flour to it like you do normal bread. You need it to stay wet and sticky. So dipping this in water and keeping everything wet and working together, it helps keep your hands clean, it helps keep you sane, and it helps keep everything from sticking to your counter. I absolutely highly recommend you get a plastic bread scraper at the very least, dough scraper at the very least. I would not want to make it without one of these. So really that's it. And of course, your starter. You can't make sourdough bread without your sourdough starter. And really that's it. That's everything, and that's how they're used. You can buy full sourdough bread kits that have all of these tools inside the kit. That's what I did. I think it was like $30 on Amazon. You'll find them range from $30 to like $50. Some might have other things in there. Some might have banneton baskets that are long and oval instead of round, whatever shape you like or whatever is going to be easier for you to transfer into whatever you're baking it into. So if you get a long round banneton, make sure your baking vessel is also going to be long and round, or it's going to be counterproductive. So make sure your banneton baskets are the same shape as your Dutch oven. So I hope you found this really helpful on making sourdough bread, how to use the tools, how to make your starter, how to have everything ready for your first attempt at making sourdough bread. And don't be nervous about it. It does seem like there's a lot to know, and there is a lot to know, but it's really not that daunting and it's really not that scary. I was super nervous about making my first loaves of sourdough bread. I had to have all the stuff, and I went out and I ordered everything so that it would come out perfect. You really don't have to. You don't have to do that. So again, when I do the video on how to make the bread itself, I will give you some substitution ideas on what you can do if you don't have any of those things. Again, you don't need them. So just have fun with it. Even if your first couple of loaves don't come out puffy and crusty, and it doesn't matter, you'll get there. You'll eventually succeed. Sometimes what's going wrong is that you're just starting your bread too soon and your sourdough starter isn't quite ready. Sometimes you're not leavening it long enough and you're too eager to bake it, so you bake it too soon. I've done that. I had a couple loaves just not come out right because I rushed them and wanted to bake them the same day that I was making it. You really should bake it the next day and give it that full overnight time to leaven and be ready for baking. So just set time aside. The biggest thing I recommend is that you don't rush this process. It's going to be a long process. Take your time with it. Don't rush it. If you just don't have the time, then this is not the day to make sourdough bread. Wait until you know you have a full day to commit to this. Start early in the morning and just go at it. So I hope this video is helpful. I hope it answered some questions about what you need to do before you make your first loaf. And if you have any questions about your starter, about what to do, if you want to send me pictures, say, hey, does my starter look okay? Is it doing what it should? Go ahead and send me pictures and I'll help the best I can. My starter took 2 full weeks to be ready because I made mine in the winter and my counter was cold and it slowed down the activity. So sometimes if your environment is just cold or you don't have a lot of active yeast in your air, it can take a little bit longer, but expect that 7 to 10 day mark for your yeast cultures to really grow and be ready and be active. And then go for it. Make some bread. And by then, I promise I will have a video up for you on how to do it. You guys have a wonderful day. Please like and subscribe my channel. And I will see you in the next video. You guys be blessed. Bye, and thank you for watching. So here's my beautiful loaf. We're just going to cut this in half. Very thick, crusty outer crust. It's very thick. And the inside is still steaming. Beautiful bread. And you can smell that sourdough yeast that I've been making. It smells so good. This is a wonderful bread. It makes the best toast. It's absolutely delicious.